Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking something that's honestly a lot more intense than you might think. The incredibly fast-paced, high-stakes science of water damage and structural restoration right here in Newton, Massachusetts. If you thought dealing with water damage just meant tossing down a few old towels and cranking open a window, well, prepare to have your mind blown. This is a literal battle, and it's fought with thermal imaging, thermodynamic equations, and some serious industrial-grade extraction. So let's jump right in with a pretty massive question. What actually happens when the mighty Charles River meets a 100-year-old foundation? It's a fascinating scenario to look at because it completely exposes the unique vulnerabilities hidden right under the floorboards of our local historic homes. What we're really looking at here is a wild clash between ancient geology, historic architecture, and modern weather.
Which brings us to Section 1, the perfect storm.
Look, Newton is facing a literal perfect storm of hidden hazards. We aren't just talking about a heavy rainstorm here. We're dealing with extreme Massachusetts freeze-thaw cycles that constantly expand and contract these microscopic foundation cracks until they just burst. You add in clay-heavy soil that acts like a giant sponge, increasing hydrostatic pressure against your house, plus a naturally high water table driven by the Charles River watershed, and you've got a real problem. And here's a total curveball for you. Newton's strict local tree preservation bylaws. Those beautiful mature tree roots are left completely unchecked to seek out and crush aging underground sewer pipes. And no, you absolutely cannot just chop down a century-old oak tree just because it's menacing your plumbing. A huge part of the problem boils down to the actual architecture itself. Modern foundations are built with updated drainage codes and materials that actively fight off moisture. But Newton, we're famous for our gorgeous historic housing stock. You know, those stunning 1920s colonials and Victorians in Newtonville and Newton Center. They often have historic fieldstone foundations. The catch is that the aging mortar joints in those old stones don't repel water at all. They act way more like a sponge, allowing groundwater to just pass directly through the walls and straight into your basement. Let's move on to Section 2, the anatomy of damage. Because once water actually gets inside a home, it's not just sitting there as a static puddle. It becomes a literal race against the clock. The damage accelerates so aggressively. Just 60 minutes in, water is spreading rapidly, and your drywall is literally acting like a straw, wicking that moisture straight up the walls. Hit the 24 to 48-hour mark, and we cross a very dangerous threshold. Microbial mold begins actively growing in the dark, damp cavities of your home. And if you think a wet room is going to just dry out on a sunny afternoon, think again. Proper professional structural drying takes a full 3 to 7 days of constant, highly specialized airflow. Which leads us to Section 3, categorizing the crisis. But the ticking clock isn't our only enemy here. The whole restoration protocol depends entirely on the actual chemical makeup of the water invading your space. The IICRC strictly breaks this down into 3 categories. Category 1 is clean water. Think burst supply lines or rainwater. It's got a pretty low contamination risk. Category 2 is gray water, like an overflowing washing machine, which carries a moderate risk. But then there's Category 3, black water. This is the nightmare stuff. Sewage backups or river flooding. It is highly contaminated with harmful bacteria and requires full-blown hazmat protocols to safely clean up. So dealing with a clean burst pipe is a vastly different and definitely less hazardous counterattack than a Category 3 flood. Let's dive into Section 4, the science of drying. This professional counterattack involves far more than just a mop and a bucket. The mitigation response always follows 3 incredibly precise methodical steps. First up, emergency extraction. These massive truck-mounted units violently suck out hundreds of gallons of standing water in mere minutes. Step 2, structural drying. This is the strategic deployment of industrial air movers and dehumidifiers all over the house. And finally, Step 3, complete reconstruction, where the whole space is meticulously rebuilt right back to its pre-loss condition.
And here is where the real secret weapon comes in: psychrometric calculations. Yeah, it sounds a bit like rocket science, and honestly, it kinda is. This isn't just guesswork. Professionals actually measure the thermodynamic properties of the moist air to strategically place their equipment. They are manipulating negative air pressure to literally pull trapped invisible moisture out from behind your drywall and out of historic plaster ceilings. They're optimizing the exact drying conditions for specific building materials.
Because here's a slightly terrifying truth for you. Surface water is often a complete illusion. What looks bone dry to the naked eye is very often still totally saturated inside the wall cavities. If you skip using thermal imaging and moisture meters, you're leaving behind hidden dampness. And weeks later, that invisible moisture is exactly what's going to warp your expensive hardwood floors, cause your paint to peel off, and breed toxic mold right under your nose. Let's move to Section 5, Navigating the Aftermath. So, the physical water is gone. Awesome. But now homeowners have to navigate a highly complex and, let's be real, often incredibly stressful administrative aftermath. Dealing with insurance policies is just daunting during a crisis. Adjusters use super complex language, and your actual coverage limits are often totally unclear until you're already financially committed. That is exactly why meticulous, daily documentation is absolutely crucial. By using thermal imaging and detailed photography, the pros provide the exact, undeniable, empirical data that insurance companies require to justify your claim and, more importantly, prevent surprise out-of-pocket costs for you. Finally, we reach Section 6, the final countdown. When you are mitigating water damage, one number basically rules them all: 60. 60 minutes. That is the guaranteed emergency response window for First Choice Water Damage Restoration Boston to actually deploy local crews and physically stop the spread of damage in your home. In this specific industry, speed isn't just a nice convenience. It is literally the difference between a minor, totally manageable repair and a massive, bank-breaking structural teardown. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on regarding your own property. Knowing Newton's incredibly unique risks, what invisible pathways is water taking through your home's foundation right now? Given the age of your historic foundation, that dense clay in your soil, and those massive mature trees out in your yard, what hidden vulnerabilities are quietly waiting right under your feet for the next big storm? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious.